Hey again, everyone. Welcome back to Speaking of Sundara, where I talk about Sundara, Dawn of a New Age, my fantasy RPG setting. This week, I wanted to sort of address a gap that I've had in my release schedule over the years. And it's something that no one's really pointed out, no one's really clamoring for me to fill. But in the interest of being complete and of giving folks everything they could want for the setting, I felt I at least needed to address it and maybe get your guys' thoughts as to whether or not this is a project that I should tackle, or if it's something that you're not really all that interested in, and maybe you'll pick it up if I do it, maybe you won't. But this is going back to phase 2 of the settings. This problem, quote unquote problem, has been going on for a little bit now. And in short, phase 2 was my Species of Sundara releases, where I went through and I did write-ups for all of the various player species that you could start out with and that we're used to seeing in a fantasy game like Pathfinder, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and any other editions that Sundara will eventually be ported to. And typically, what I saw as a player when you would pick up books for settings that use these games, you would get big, long write-ups on humans. Humans would have all of these different ethnicities and all of these different diaspora, and they would get big, long histories, and we'd hear about their empires and their small towns and their great heroes. And then we would get around to elves, or we'd get around to dwarves, or we'd get around to halflings, and they'd be almost a footnote in comparison. You know, you might have a great dwarven kingdom, or you might have the elves of this particular ancient forest, but they almost felt kind of like an afterthought tacked into the setting to sort of remind you that this is a fantasy world, and so these are the things that exist here, but they weren't given that same kind of attention. They always felt either other or like they were just monsters you were allowed to play with, particularly in the case of orc write-ups. So I wanted to sort of stand that on its head, and I wanted to give that kind of attention and variety to the non-human species to sort of give players all of that right from the get-go, rather than getting around to it eventually when I needed to fill in content, which is what it feels like a lot of settings will do, of once you've bought in and gotten interested, then they'll start expanding stuff like that. Whereas I wanted to make that a selling point right from the beginning. So, as an example, for folks who didn't watch me talk about the various releases we had on the other videos on this channel, you could take the Ganorgon and the Takatori, which are both dwarven subspecies, ethnicities, whatever we're calling them. And they are both very definitely dwarves, but they are vastly different in terms of culture, in terms of the environments you tend to find them in terms of how they see the world. So while they could meet, they could have children, they could be adopted into each other's cultures, they could understand each other fairly easily, they are very different when it comes to their sociology, when it comes to their religious beliefs, all of these things. I wanted them to feel unique, but at the same time I didn't want them to be so different that people questioned why I'd made them both the same species. And that was sort of the ethos I had running through all the different books I released. And from what I can tell, the folks who've commented on it or who have left reviews, that seems to be a thing both players and game masters really enjoyed. They liked that variety, they liked that attention to detail, particularly because since Sundara is a modular setting, it doesn't come with a whole lot of really heavy, really clunky world history. And so I didn't have to input the origins of these particular subspecies. I didn't have to explain in great detail where they are and what numbers they're in, and give all those extraneous details that we don't normally need to track. It's a tool that players and game masters can use to tell their own stories with. But there is a particular species that folks who look through the roster may notice is missing, and there is no Humans of Sundara book. And part of that is just, I never really got around to it. By the time I finished I think it was the 6th that I did for them, I believe I ended with gnomes. And after gnomes, I really wanted to just do something different. I had been doing species pretty steadily for about half a year at that point, and I needed a break, which is why I moved on to Towns of Sundara, which was very popular. And after that, I moved on to various other organizations. We've seen Sellswords of Sundara, Cults of Sundara, Guilds of Sundara, just released a little while ago. And I never really came back and filled in the human book. Now, for folks who have read the various cities, you've listened to the audio dramas I've put out. This is not a game where there's no humans. There are very definitely human characters, and we see them all over as NPCs. We've heard them voiced. We've seen these various aspects of the setting. But I didn't go in and give them the same treatment that I give to all the other fantasy species you can play. And part of that is because I don't know what else I would say about humans. Humans in fantasy settings have been done in so many different varieties and different ways. I feel it might be difficult to actually put a spin on them that people haven't seen before, which is kind of what I want to do with Sundara. I want it to feel unique while still being a recognizable and at least familiar and feel fantasy setting. At the same time, I feel that is a big gap, and it's something that we could address if readers out there want me to, if players want to see what I would eventually do to make humans distinct and unique in my own setting. And I have some ideas, but I would like to get some thoughts from you all. What is something that you're either very tired of seeing for humans in fantasy games, or what is something that you really wish we would do with humans and people just don't? And as an example of, do you want to see more humans who are not necessarily the newcomers to the setting, but who aren't treated with that young species feeling they normally have? Do you want to see humans who, while are still clever and unique and able to fill all the different roles, because that's kind of the slot humans have in these fantasy games, do you want to see humans who have long-standing relationships with different fantasy cultures? Do you want to see humans that have been adopted into other cultures and how that works? Do you want humans to have a particular relationship with any certain fantasy creature over the years that they've sort of patterned their society off of? Or do you want to see humans who have adapted to environments they really shouldn't be in, which is something we're historically good at, but something I definitely want to avoid doing is, and I'm not saying this as a criticism, I'm just saying that we've all seen this done, so it's not something I want to do for Sundara. I don't just want to have people reading through my book and go, oh, there's your fantasy English Empire, there's your fantasy Vikings, there's your fantasy samurai. Because we can't escape the history of our real world. It inspires everything we do in some way, shape, or form or another, because it is the basis that we draw all of our knowledge from. At the same time, I don't just want to do a one-to-one comparison, change the name, and turn in my homework hoping no one notices. For a good example, anyone who is also a big fan of Conan and his setting of Hyperborea, when you look at the map and you read over it, back in the early days of the pulp era, it likely seemed very interesting and very creative and very fantastical. But nowadays, when you read over these country names, and especially if you're a fan of history, you know the references being made, whether it's the war between the Aesir and the Vanir that definitely fill a Scandinavia setting in that world, whether it's Aquilonia as their Rome, whether it's Kitai as their Far East. I want to sort of avoid such obvious comparisons, but I still want people to have that moment of, I recognize this bit of culture, or I recognize this little twist of humanity, or this feels like something that would be new and unique that humanity could do that isn't necessarily just going through the archaeological record and asking, all right, what if this ethnicity, this diaspora, this historical empire or country, but we added dragons and had orcs? Those are the things I sort of want to avoid doing, but I haven't really seen a lot of folks who are really engaged with humans, particularly folks who are drawn to Sundara. They seem to be the kind of players who, and I am very definitely a part of this camp these days, more often than not, don't really enjoy humans as much because they're not as fantastical for them. They get to be humans every single day. Why, when given a game like this, wouldn't they play something else for the fantasy and the escapism? And so that's sort of the rolling that up in a ball of, what could I do with humans in this setting that would engage you, that would make you interested in them? What is something that you don't see enough of, that you feel this would be a good place to put them, so that you could really just play around with something you're not allowed to do with humans in other settings? But leave your thoughts in the comments below, especially if you have any other parts of Sundara that you feel I haven't gotten to yet or you feel are missing, whether it's an aspect of one of the cities that I didn't explore, or you feel that there should be more towns, more villages, I should do sequels to Towns of Sundara, or maybe there are more organizations, more factions that you feel haven't really been hit on yet and that a world like this should have. Keep in mind, I have merchants coming up. That's my next project, so stay tuned for that one if you're a fan of just wide-ranging NPCs to help all of your players get the loot that they need, or at least get the stuff they found in the crypt changed into Coin of the Realm. But until next time, happy gaming, everyone.